Your cursor is blinking on line 4 of a document you were excited about 2 hours ago. Your hands are still on the keyboard. Nothing is wrong with the task. Nothing outside has changed, but something inside you has quietly closed the door, and you're already reaching for your phone before you've even admitted you've stopped. You'll call this laziness later. You'll call it a short attention span or a lack of discipline or proof that you're just not built for follow through. But none of that is what actually happened in your brain in that exact moment. Something specific switched off. Researchers can watch it happen. They can time it. And once you see what it actually is, you'll never describe it as laziness again. Start with something you already know, even if you don't know its name. In the 1920s, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik noticed something strange in a Vienna cafe. Waiters could recall complicated unpaid orders in perfect detail right up until the bill was settled. The moment payment happened, the memory vanished. She took that observation into the lab and confirmed it. Unfinished tasks lodge themselves in your memory. Completed ones get filed away and forgotten. That's the Zeigarnik effect, and it's why an unfinished project can nag at you at 2 in the morning even when you haven't thought about it all day. Here's the part that stings. If unfinished tasks are the ones that haunt you, why do you keep creating more of them on purpose? You open the course, you start the book, you build the spreadsheet, and somewhere in the middle, you just stop adding one more open loop to a mind that's already carrying dozens. Think about what that actually means over a year. 12 half-finished courses, 6 books stalled at roughly the same chapter, a dozen small projects sitting at almost. Each one, according to Zeigarnik's own research, should be sitting in your memory like an unpaid bill, tugging at your attention at random moments. And it does. That low hum of guilt you feel, scrolling past an app icon for a course you paid for and never opened, that's not you being dramatic. That's the exact mechanism she documented in a Vienna cafe 100 years ago, still running in your head today, uninvited. That alone would be strange enough, but it gets stranger. A researcher named John Eastwood, who runs the boredom lab at York University, spent years trying to define boredom scientifically, and what he found upends the assumption almost everyone carries. Boredom isn't the absence of stimulation. It's not nothing happening. Eastwood's research describes it as a failure of your attention system, a state where you want to be engaged with something, but your brain can't latch onto anything, including the very task sitting in front of you. Boredom, in its framing, is your mind straining against its own leash and finding nothing to bite into. Sit with that for a second. You're not disengaging because the task became easy or unimportant. Your attention system is actively malfunctioning, refusing to lock onto something you deliberately chose minutes earlier. It's not a preference. It's closer to a stall. And Eastwood's lab found something else almost as a side note that makes this harder to shrug off. People report the highest levels of boredom not during genuinely empty moments like waiting in a line with nothing to do, but during tasks that are almost engaging tasks with just enough structure to demand your attention, but not enough pull to hold it. A half-interesting task, in other words, is worse than a fully boring one. Your brain treats the near miss as a kind of static, a signal it can't tune into and can't fully ignore either. That's the exact zone most unfinished projects live in. Not boring enough to abandon on sight, not engaging enough to keep you. If that unsettles you, the next piece should worry you more. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who coined the term flow, spent decades mapping exactly when people stay locked into a task and when they abandon it. His research plotted 2 variables against each other, the challenge of a task and your skill level at it. Too much challenge relative to skill and you get anxiety. Too little challenge relative to skill and you get boredom, the precise state where your brain quietly starts hunting for an exit. Csikszentmihalyi could predict almost to the minute when a person's engagement would collapse just by tracking how the difficulty curve of a task flattened out. That means the moment you stopped on line 4 wasn't random. It was the exact point where the task's difficulty dipped below what your brain needed to stay hooked. Your attention didn't wander. It was released the way a magnet lets go once the field gets too weak to hold it. Csikszentmihalyi's studies used a method that made this almost impossible to argue with. He gave people pages decades before smartphones and had them buzz at random points throughout the day. Every buzz, the person recorded exactly what they were doing and how engaged they felt in that instant. Across thousands of these snapshots, the pattern held with remarkable consistency. Engagement rose and fell in near lockstep with the gap between challenge and skill, almost like watching a thermostat respond to temperature. It wasn't personality, it wasn't mood. It was a measurable, repeatable curve, present in accountants and rock climbers and surgeons alike. You've probably told yourself the opposite story for years, that you're simply someone who starts strong and fades, that other people have some reserve of grit you never got issued, that if you just tried harder, pushed through white knuckle the boring part, you'd finish like everyone else seems to. But willpower was never the missing ingredient. What actually happened is closer to a mismatch, a specific measurable gap between what the task demanded of you and what your brain was engineered to chase. Your brain isn't rewarding effort. It's rewarding a certain rate of new information, a certain texture of challenge. When that rate flattens, the reward dries up first and the motivation to continue evaporates right behind it, whether you meant it to or not. Picture the moment again, but closer this time. Not the whole afternoon, just the second it happened. The screen, brightness hasn't changed, but it suddenly looks flatter, duller, like someone turned the saturation down 2 notches without touching the monitor. That's not the screen. That's your dopamine system quietly downgrading the value of what you're looking at in real time because nothing about it has surprised you in the last 90 seconds. Your hand moves toward your phone before you've consciously decided to reach for it. That's not distraction hijacking you. That's your brain following a reward gradient toward the nearest available novelty, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. This is where it gets uncomfortable because it means the problem was never really about you. It's about the architecture. Every unfinished course sitting in your account, every book with a bookmark frozen at chapter 3, every project that got 70% built and then quietly died. These aren't failures of character. They're the visible wreckage of a challenge curve that flattened out before the task ended in a brain that was never designed to sustain effort once the payoff stopped growing. Think about how many things in your life are structured exactly wrong for this. A gym membership that starts hard and interesting and slowly becomes routine motion. A hobby that felt thrilling in week 1 and mechanical by week 6. A job task that was genuinely engaging when it was new and is now something you can do half asleep. Each one follows the same curve Csikszentmihalyi mapped decades ago, and each one loses you at roughly the same predictable point, not because you're weak, but because the difficulty stopped rising to meet you. Even the apps you can't put down are built on the opposite version of this same principle. A feed that never lets the challenge flatten, that always injects one more unpredictable, slightly too interesting piece of content right before your attention would have released its grip. It isn't an accident that you can sit through 90 minutes of scrolling without a single moment of boredom, and then stall out 11 minutes into a task that actually matters to you. One was engineered around exactly what Eastwood and Csikszentmihalyi documented. The other wasn't engineered at all, which raises the real question. Not, how do I force myself through boredom, But how do I stop designing tasks that guarantee the exit ramp will appear exactly when it does? The people who finish things aren't the ones with more willpower reserves. They're usually the ones who've learned consciously or not to keep injecting small increases in difficulty or novelty right before the flattening point arrives. A new constraint, a harder version of the same problem, a fresh angle that makes the task interesting again, just as it was about to go flat. Your cursor is still blinking on line 4. Nothing outside has changed, but now you know exactly what did.